Hello and welcome to the Roundtable Consult. I am your host, Sonya Madison, and unfortunately, my co-host is out of town. And while we typically would cancel if one of us can't be here, this week has just been so crazy, so stressful, so much full with anxiety that I thought to myself, you know what? We can't have podcast or a conversation without an episode discussing not only the attempted assassination in the RNC, but I don't want to talk about it next week. I just want to get it out the way and share my thoughts and then move on to the Olympics, which is starting next week. And so with that, I want to encourage all of you that are listening, feel free to comment on Facebook. I'll try to make sure to periodically check it so that, I'm seeing what you're saying, I'm responding in real time. And that way it can still be more of a conversation, even though Dr. Williams isn't here. And there's so much that happened this week that I'm sure even if you may not like one topic, you can probably weigh in on another. So hopefully you guys will join me in this conversation and let's get into it. So first, let's talk about some current events. So just recently, and I want to say just yesterday, like late last night, the death of Congresswoman Sheila Lee Jackson was announced. And it's really heartbreaking because I've met her once and she was just a very nice person to me. I know that there are some people that may have a different experience with her, but not only is she a wife and a mother, but she's also a lawyer and a politician. And so you can imagine when you have so many people that love on you as you are trying to grow your family, as well as are dependent on you to represent them in government, it is a huge loss that she is no longer here with us. One of the last things that she tweeted, because I was unfortunately on social media a lot this week, was the strong support for Joe Biden. And so even up until the end, she still remained engaged. And so again, thoughts and prayers to her family, to her constituents, and to everyone that was touched by her. So the next we had a controversial decision. So get into some legal stuff that I know I have to respond to, but a controversial opinion that dismissed the federal government's indictment against Donald Trump for the mishandling of classified documents. So essentially what the opinion is stating is that it held that it was unconstitutional to have an acting special counsel receiving federal funds or not under the appointments clause. And so what essentially the appointments clause is that it gives the president the power to appoint certain officers with the advice and consent of the Senate. So as you often see when it comes to Supreme Court appointments or even a lot of these judiciary appointments, they often have to have approval from the Senate. And so under the appointments clause, that's how that works. And some of this also goes into appointments. So you'll also see, and that's why it becomes so important when you listen to some of the presidents, not only President Biden, but also former President Trump, really harping on getting the House and the Senate. These appointments have to go through the Senate. And so if you do not have your party that is, for the most part, the majority in the Senate, then you're not it's a hurdle. It's a hurdle. I mean, you can still get appointments passed. And we've seen in the past that happens, but it becomes a hurdle. And with President Trump, or former President Trump, let me make sure that's good. Former President Trump, I imagine that some of these appointments, just based on the RNC, may be fairly controversial. And so if the Democrats were to win the Senate, it could be an issue. But nonetheless, so that's the appointments clause. However, the appointments clause does permit the president and heads of departments to appoint inferior officers without the Senate consent. And so you have, essentially those officers that, hey, no, these aren't inferior. These are very important superior officers that really should come through the Senate for consent, which again, I've talked briefly about when we talk about Supreme Court nomination, talking about appointments to the administration, like, a Secretary of State, those kind of stuff. yeah, okay, we need to get that consented through the Senate. But inferior positions, they, as long as the president's okay or the head of the department is okay, no need for Senate approval. And so historically, for decades, years, centuries, people or the government has considered special counsel to be those inferior officers that don't require Senate approval. And this is for both administrations. Like I said, that's why I say for years and for decades. I mean, you have Republicans that agree with this. They had their special counsels, and they would use, the Department of Justice would use those special counsels to go and prosecute where, again, the Attorney General may not have the capacity to be able to do it, on his own. So that's been a longstanding precedent, has been an issue. But now this judge is saying, hey, perhaps we should look at that. So I'm not going to permit this case to go on. And one of the problems with that is, first and foremost, when you are looking at the fact that this has been going on for centuries, that means there's been a lot of indictments under a special counsel. So if we're going to say, hey, this is unconstitutional, then we got to go back and look at all those previous indictments that were prosecuted by special counsel and overturn those, convictions. And so, are we really going to go down that road? But also what becomes problematic about this opinion is that and this is Judge Cannon, she concedes in the opinion that the special counsel, Jack Smith's argument that he is an inferior officer is correct. She accepts it, but decided to express reservations from, I don't know. And that's where we've gotten into people that have said, oh, well, if you look at Justice Thomas' concurring opinion in the presidential immunity case, he suggests that the appointment of this special counsel may be unconstitutional. And so and considering that this opinion is coming after that case was decided by the Supreme Court, you can easily see, I mean, sometimes when we talk about circumstantial evidence, we're talking about, hey, does A and B look like they can easily get you to see? And that's what we're saying here is, hey, wait a minute, Justice Thomas in a concurring opinion, and just to be clear, concurring opinions are not law. They're just concurring. It's the majority opinion that's the law when it comes to the Supreme Court, but not the concurring opinion. So what we're saying is, okay, you saw this in the concurring opinion. Justice Thomas is giving you an opportunity to dismiss another case against this former president, and you ran with it, even though you put in your opinion that you accept the argument that Jack Smith is an inferior officer, and therefore there is no violation here because inferior officers don't require Senate consent. You use this as an opportunity to throw it out. And the special counsel has announced that he's going to appeal, but you can imagine an appeal and then to restart this is not going to happen before November. So this is yet another case in which the former president has enabled a delay while he goes and campaigns for his presidency. And again, we talked about this with the immunity case, and we talked about this with the New York case. If former President Trump is reelected, then you can imagine, again, he's going to make appointments that will ensure that, hey, there won't be a special prosecutor or special counsel to continue with this indictment. He's also going to then be able to use this immunity argument against his New York case and his potential Georgia case. And so, again, it creates chaos. And what this country often likes to tout is the ability to say, hey, we have checks and balances in place. And by that means, if we feel as if the legislative is either overstepping their boundaries or abusing their position, hey, we've got the judiciary to check them on it. And if we feel like the judiciary is doing it, hey, we got the legislative branch to check on it because they can write laws that overturn judicial opinions. And then you have the executive branch that ensures that, hey, what is written is what it only is the thing that will be enforced. We're not going to go beyond that. Even if one party wants to enforce what we don't, what is not legislatively available. And so, with the upcoming elections and seeing we've got a convicted felon as someone who's the Republican nominee, we're also seeing the erosion of some of our checks and balances if he were to get elected as president again in 2024. So there's something to keep in mind as we continue with this election cycle. So then we had the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. So let me first and foremost say, I know I'm often on this platform, warning people about Trump, calling him, and I still stand by it, but calling him a narcissist, calling him a racist, calling him misogynistic. And while, again, I stand on all that and I can give you all my facts to support it, I strongly disagree and condemn the violence against him. Like, to me, how you combat that, how you respond to that, is you go to the ballot box and you vote. And it's so crucial, because as we are often hearing about, oh, polls are saying Trump is ahead, or, oh, we've got these donors that are asking for Biden or pressuring Biden to step down, or we have the media that is creating narratives without fact checking. Ultimately, and we have to believe this, because I understand there are a lot of conspiracy theories that will even thwart or contradict or go or push back on this notion that, hey, your vote actually counts. But we have to just, to me, at least for me, the only way I can have peace is just, accepting, or at least having faith that my vote is actually counted and is part of a larger, everyone that votes, the majority, and well, at least when it comes to the presidential elections, that majority then gets those electoral college votes, right? And so, this notion that, hey, a certain party or a certain group of people want to see him dead, that is not me. I do not want to see harm. And if anything, when I heard about it, I immediately was like, oh my gosh, this is a fear. I mean, we're growing into a country that does tend to respond more with guns and violence than with, hey, let's really sit down and talk about this. Because if we all recognize that we are a diverse nation, and there isn't just one religion, or there isn't just one way of a lifestyle, or there isn't just one way of thinking about education, if we acknowledge a diversity of thought, then let's listen to each diverse thought, and try to get an understanding as to why I may feel a way, even if you don't feel that way. And I'd imagine, again, when we're talking about some of the, again, racist, misogynist, narcissistic things that he does, we are talking about, hey, this is someone who is fairly selfish. And we see that in not only his rhetoric. I mean, he got up there and said, hey, God is appointing me as the person who is going to save this nation. He got up there and said, hey, the Dems are attacking me. It's a very me, mentality. And even when we're talking about a lot of these convictions that he's doing, or that he's been, convicted of, or if we're talking about some of the laws he's violated, and we're talking about even how he managed his companies. Again, those are just honest dialogues. But now I would never say, okay, he should be shot and killed. That to me is where it goes across the line, or encourage people to go and destroy a Capitol building that caused the death of an officer, like having that insurrection. I mean, that is beyond the line. And so, again, I just want to reiterate, while I strongly disagree with Trump's policies and his character, and have been very vocal about this, I am also strongly in disagreement with the violence that was against him. And so, in that transition, I did appreciate that President Biden not only called him and asked him, hey, are you okay? I hate that this happened to you. And they both came in agreement that we need to make sure that in our speaking and in our words, we're not bringing a call for an insurrection or a call for violence. He showed some compassion in that. And I think that's something that we're all called to do when we find someone in a position that they're extremely vulnerable in their life and their health is at risk. We have some sympathy, some empathy with that. And so, I do sympathize and empathize with his family, who I'm sure, no doubt, were extremely concerned and, life-changing to hear that there is not only an actual target, but that target has potentially been executed. Now, there has been more information that is coming out that is positioned that this alleged shooter not only had a target on former President Trump, but also had a target on the current President Biden. And again, it just goes to the tone of where we are now. And I know oftentimes you see it on the show, you see Mark and I, we may seem like we're getting hated as if we're going to hurt each other, but at the end of every show, it's all love. It's all love. And again, this is a show that it has a foundational of a Christian principles to it. And so it is so important for us as Christians to make sure that people see God's love in us. And so again, I can't stress that enough. But now, and let me take it back. There's no but. Can't stress that enough, period. Also, in Biden's response, he talked to or sat down with Lester Holt. And Lester Holt asked him about the same rhetoric. And again, I appreciate President Biden's response. It is, hey, listen, again, it is so important that we can articulate our opinions, our disagreements, without it escalating to a point of physical harm. But there's also an importance of still making sure we articulate our disagreements in the facts that support them. And so, in this instance, again, if we see, and he's been, to some degree prosecuted for some of this, because we've seen that Jack Smith is also trying to prosecute him for the conspiracy of the insurrection. That, to me, we can talk about the facts and by which the special prosecutor supports that theory. And that, to me, is an honest dialogue versus just saying, oh, someone's against me, and you have nothing supported. And so, I just want to make sure, because even as the media, I'm seeing just lately so many skewed stories. They've often been reporting about people pushing Biden out that then come in and say, hey, I've been supportive of Biden from the beginning. And for example, Hakeem Jeffries, he recently again came out and said, hey, listen, my stance and support for Biden has not changed. If he is going to stay on this ticket, I am behind him 120%. And I have not pressured him to step down. That is his decision to make. And what's to me important in that is, hey, listen, I don't doubt that there have been conversations with Joe Biden saying, hey, that debate was tough. Are you sure you have the stamina to not only get through this campaign, because there's going to be another debate coming up and you can't do what you did in that last debate and the next debate, say in September, because it just hurts. You see how it hurts us, and not only when it comes to people's confidence in you, but also when it comes to people's trust in us, because now they're questioning whether we have been hiding or deceptive in how we speak of you. So I don't know if those conversations were had, and I think those are honest conversations to have with him. But this narrative from the media that the conversation is really more like, no, you need to get out. No, get out. I'm asking you to get out. I don't know if those are true honest, And the fact that a lot of times the media is saying, well, anonymous Democrat or a Democrat who we can't name, but is someone who is high up in leadership in that party, to me, that's one, that's not helpful. It's rhetoric, because again, you're not only a journalist, but we're talking about public figures. We're talking about interests that people have in the public. I have an interest in knowing which senators, congressmen, Democratic leaders who have put themselves out as public figures. I have an interest in knowing where they're staying here. What if they do not want President Biden to campaign for reelection, if they do not want to see him reelected? To me, as a constituent or as a person within this country, should be able to know, okay, well, who is it? Is that someone that represents me? Is that someone that I support? And even if I don't want to go through that analysis, maybe I just want to ask, hey, tell me why you feel that way. Is it really just about this one debate, or was there a history in which you felt some concern? As well as, okay, well then who would you like to see take his place? Because that's another conversation to be had here. The Democratic Party is less than a couple of weeks before their own convention in August. And we're not hearing who these alleged Democratic leaders would like to see be their candidate. I will say, and I know I've been vocal about this repeatedly on this show, I think it would be dangerous to replace Joe Biden. And considering that he has repeatedly, over and over and over, have said, I'm staying in it, even if he were, say, like tomorrow to say, well, I'm dropping out, I think there'll be some skepticism as to, was that really your choice? Or is that, again, all people telling you people that are not the people that actually voted for you in their primary ballots, but people that are representatives saying, hey, I don't want you to do this? Because that to me, if we're talking about, hey, there's a threat of democracy here when it comes to President Trump. If you replace your candidate after a democratic process, and this candidate has been vocal repeatedly over and over again, hey, I'm staying in it, I got you. And then you've got a narrative where people are pressuring him to drop out. It'd be hard to continue to argue that this person is a threat to democracy when you have, to some degree, thwarted democracy. Now, I know Dr. Williams disagrees with that, and he will probably make sure to have his own monologue to dispute that, but that is just my concern. One of the things that also happened this week is a letter with several, I want to say it started with at least 1,400 Black women leaders, some congressional leaders, some lawyers, some lobbyists, just, people in government, signed a whole petition begging Joe Biden to stay. Now, you can probably imagine, at least, and this is probably more opinion, but for the most part, Black people have been what the Democratic Party has relied on to ensure they get those extra votes. And so if you don't have the support of the majority of Black people, because I don't want to make it seem like we're some kind of monolithic group, and the RNC shows that not all Black people do think alike. But if you don't have the support of the majority, particularly in this race, it's going to be really tight. I don't care who your candidate is, then it's going to put you at a disadvantage. And so to ignore what this petition says, as well as what I'm seeing on social media, and I recognize that algorithms on social media are often used to make sure the news that you want to see is the news that you see. But nonetheless, it still shows a lot of people, not only through this petition, but also through social media, that would be extremely disappointed if Biden stepped down because of pressure from various Democratic leaders and donors, because I know that this it's been said that there have been donors. And again, I don't know if this is true or not. This past week, I've just had a little bit of a skepticism with the media lately. But there has been reported that there are donors that are refusing to continue their contribution unless he steps aside. Again, President Biden has been very clear, hey, he is about serving people, not big corporations, not elitists, not billionaires, but people. And so, to hear that, oh, you stepped down because you didn't get money would also be, very hurtful for how we see our government in terms of whether it's for the people or if it's for the highest bidder. So that's my thoughts on that. And so now transition to the Republican National Convention that happened this week before we get into the topic of the day, because I know some of you are tuning in just to hear our thoughts on how that convention went and whether or not, we felt as if it was a unifying message as they claimed it was going to be, or whether it was a circus as we figured it was going to be. So here are my thoughts on this. First of all, the party is fractured. I know a lot of people will say, including myself, I've said this before, oh, those Republicans, they are unifying around Donald Trump. They are following this person blindly to whatever, unlike Democrats right now that are, not rallying behind President Biden and standing with him to the end. Again, the reality, don't let the media fool you. The Republican Party is fractured. First of all, there were a lot of noticeable absences. You didn't have former President Bush. You didn't have former House Speaker Paul Ryan. You didn't have Senator Mitt Romney. And you didn't have Vice President Mike Pence, just to name a few. Because there were also, as I was reading various reports from various local outlets, there are a lot of states that reported some of their local congressional people did not attend. So the party is fractured. Not only did you have some noticeable absences, you also had the former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy condemning Matt Gaetz in front of a camera, and it's so interesting that I feel like now Kevin McCarthy is having a little bit of a, I don't know, he's probably the change person, or having a little bit of a, let me rethink how I blindly or, support Trump or whatever. But anyways, he said that not only did he suggest that Matt Gaetz did actually commit assaults on women, but he applied it through I hope the girls get the justice they deserve. I mean, those were his words. I hope the girls get the justice they deserve when speaking about Matt Gaetz. And so, again, these are two Republicans, and there are also two Republicans that are going head-to-head against each other, and they're not even the same district, but you see they're going head-to-head against each other. And so that's not unifying. You also continue to have people like Representative Adam Kinzinger, Liz Cheney, and former governor of Arkansas, Asa Hutchinson, who again, all Republicans, saying that, hey, I am going to be vocal against endorsing Trump. I mean, Adam Kinzinger at this point, he's pretty much helping the Biden campaign. I mean, you have a lot of people helping the Biden campaign. And, to some degree, and let me be clear, particularly when it comes to local elections, oftentimes I vote Republican on local elections, even though, again, like I'm very supportive of Joe Biden and the federal. But if you're looking at, hey, I want to make sure that the policy I want to live by, or the lifestyle I want to live by, and make sure my laws reflect, you really need to look at your local elections. But even if you follow the Republican mantra, then to me, you wouldn't vote Republican in that context when it comes to federal elections, because Republican philosophy is, hey, small government. The federal government is not here to talk about minimum wage, or to talk about, even as we saw with the Roe v. Wade, what the Supreme Court did say was, what the Supreme Court was trying to do is say, hey, Let the states decide if they want to have abortion laws or not. And so, if you're a Republican in that context, then you don't want government dictating how you live. You don't want to see that reflection in your lifestyle. But if you do want your president, your government to dictate how you live within your state, then you should probably be more likely voting Democrat, right? Because they're more thinking of a big government. They talk about supporting a national or increasing the national minimum wage. They talk about making sure to codify Roe v. Wade so that is more of a national law. And so they talk about, again, with their infrastructure bill, and to make sure that, hey, everyone, all the states can have some money for money. They talked about, reducing or eliminating some of the student loan debt. And so if that kind of policy is what you want, is more of a policy that directly affects you, you probably should be more likely voting Democrat. But nonetheless, even in that context, then it also means that, hey, you've got to be, and I say this, you've really got to be diligent in your own research and due diligence about what's happening right now. A lot of people have talked about Project 2025, and that can be a whole podcast in and of itself. But one of the things that I repeatedly saw, and this is in Project 2025, is those mass deportation zones. And I'm just like, first of all, it would be, it's not feasible. No one's going to, there's a reason why immigration reform has taken so long, because you can't just do a massive deportation like that. And we all recognize that being able to help people escaping, various catastrophes in their own country, having people coming for asylums and stuff, that's something that our country should support. And again, if we're going back to Christian values, Jesus was an immigrant. He was leaving one area because of what was going on. His parents were leaving, and their pilgrimage led them to Bethlehem. And even then, they continued to a pilgrimage that went over into Egypt. And doing this all to escape what was happening to their family. And so if you then find yourself, with the compassion that, hey, if I see a person in need, like we the story of his birth, there was no more room, and someone did allow them to sleep somewhere. If you're saying, hey, I want to be the person that says, hey, no, I've got a space, sure, you can stay here, essentially treating people as, you would want to have treated Christ if he came, then you're not going to support a massive deportation, right? So anyways, again, it's just really important to, again, do some due diligence, because this isn't about inciting violence. It really is about making sure you have an informed vote when you go to the ballot. So some other controversial things that happened, or interesting things. I mean, I'm not saying it was all bad, but you can imagine there's going to probably be some bias. I'll concede to that. He announced his vice presidential running mate, J.D. Vance. And as I'm sure has been repeated over and over, J.D. Vance once called Trump America's Hitler. He once said he couldn't support him because he hurts Muslims and other minorities that he feels as if it's in his family, feels the people that he loves. And also has little federal government experience. This is someone who, when he changed against this idea that, okay, maybe Trump isn't America's Hitler and I can stand by him, he changed for the purpose of, hey, let me get into government, let me get a Senate seat. And then now if I kiss the ring, I can now get this VP seat. You see how he's escalating so quickly. Now, I'm not saying little government experience means that he's not qualified, because again, we had a former president, President Obama, who also had little government experience and ran for president, and I support him then. So I'm not saying that is a bad thing. And as we see, and I've said this over and over again, it really is important that there is a mentoring happening within not only like communities of family, but also communities within the political parties, communities in employment, it's communities in general. It's real communities in church. It really is important to have some kind of mentoring, thing, to have an older generation refuse to mentor, help, bring up the younger generation. It's a guarantee of history continuing to repeat itself, right? We don't need to continue to reinvent wheels. But and so that's good that, okay, this is someone young, perhaps you're going to try to mentor and take it on wing. Granted, again, I still think he's a narcissist, racist, misogynist. So I don't know if that's the future that I want for this country, but nonetheless, that's something to think about. And I think with a lot of discussion around Joe Biden's age, Trump's age, and their health and the like, some of that is that conversation of, hey, passing a torch, right? We hear that over and over. Hey, pass the torch. That's what Nancy Pelosi did with Hakeem Jeffries. You pass the torch, right? And again, I do think that's important. I have been critical of various leaders, even here locally. I would say, as much as I loved John Lewis and continue to love and think he was a great guy, I wish he would have had mentored someone or at least passed that seat before he passed, so that it's just true and guaranteed we're not reinventing wheels here, because there are people that look to the federal government to make sure their freedoms are protected. And we don't want to not pass that information on how to ensure we continue to do that without going through mentoring and all that. So I definitely agree with mentoring and whatnot. But it's one thing to have an admiration for someone from the very beginning and want to latch on to them as a mentee. But it's another to say someone's the America's Hitler. And again, those are his words, because I would not use those words per se, in describing him, because I do think that could be a little bit more polarizing, calling someone Hitler. But nonetheless, I can understand if someone says, hey, some of the traits that he's exuding or his admiration for Hitler is concerning. But nonetheless, J.D. Vance called him America's Hitler. To then go and latch yourself on to a person that you disagree with, you say hurts your community, as someone you then want to mentor you and use that to be able to get into the position. Stay with that if you want. I'll leave it to you guys as the viewers to decide whether or not you feel like that's correct. So nonetheless, a couple of other things, because really I see that I'm not getting into the topic. Then also a couple of things that I'll mention about this RNC and then get to the message of defining unity. There were problematic speakers. So I've talked about how there were people that weren't there, noticeable absences, but then there were people that were there that were problematic. So Amber Rose, if you don't know who she is, I'm not encouraging you to go look her up. I'm not trying to give her any more airspace. I will just say, I think they described her as a rapper and influencer. I don't know any of her rap songs. I don't know her as a rapper. And I don't know anyone who is influenced by Amber Rose. I also do not like this view that particularly when it comes to minorities and Black people, because I'm seeing this narrative over and over again. Oh, now that Trump has had an attempted assassination, he's definitely going to get Black votes. And it's ridiculous. But anyways, to follow this notion that we are all this monolithic group that's going to listen to any celebrity who happens to be Black, it's dangerous and it's ridiculous. I mean, one, it perpetuates stereotypes against us, which then hurts us in trying to advance the needle, to trying to close that wealth gap and trying to make sure we achieve the American dream. It's bad enough if we had a president that said, hey, immigrants are taking Black jobs. Okay, now you're saying, hey, there's a certain jobs for white people and other people, and then there are certain jobs for Black people. And I don't know what those certain jobs are, but it takes away someone's, particularly a Black person, like if I was raising a child, I don't have children, but if I was raising children and they hear that, then they can easily decide, oh, well, I wanted to be this when I grew up, but now that I'm hearing that they're Black jobs, then let me make sure that I have at least a fallback plan on the Black job, whatever that is, so that I can ensure that I can still be productive to the society. And so, again, enough media, enough political parties with this narrative that minorities have specific or certain entertainment type interests, or specific certain agendas that are monolithic and that are unique and different from what other people have. And I say this also to Black people, because oftentimes you hear, oh, well, Joe Biden or President Obama didn't do anything for Black people. Okay, first of all, that's not true. You can, not only has the unemployment rate among Black people decreased among both administrations, but also Obamacare helped a lot of Black people in general, which a lot of these were Black people looking for access to healthcare. I am on Obamacare as an entrepreneur. To me, it helped me find a pathway to get insurance without having to subject to high expenses, because I'm not going to be able to negotiate as well as, say, the government, or as well as, say, a corporation, negotiate that insurance package like they can, because they've got more dollars to bring to the table than I do. So that was helpful. Even when we're talking about the role of federal government, again, if you feel like, oh, well, Sonya, there should be a Black agenda. Okay, fine. If you feel like that, I mean, I disagree. But if you feel like that, then that agenda really needs to apply to your local elections. You cannot look at the federal government as going to do anything other than do what's best for everyone as a whole, as a whole. And so if they believe that, hey, it helps everyone to help the low or and poor class, then, hey, we then make sure to help the low economic and destitute class, so that everyone in this country benefits. And while, it is true that oftentimes minorities, Black people do encompass those classes, then you look at some of the programs that have been out there, and you look at Civil Rights Act, you look at how President Biden has been active in trying to get even the Voter Rights Act reinstated, because we had a Supreme Court that essentially said, hey, what's in the Voters Rights Act right now, it's not necessary anymore. So either Congress comes up with something new, because we're not saying there aren't still some issues here. We're just saying the means by which you were dealing with those issues can't be based on what the current legislation is. And again, Congress, even though President Biden has passed a lot of legislation, thank you, we've also seen Congress bicker when it comes to certain legislation, particularly those related to, again, a marginalized group. Immigration policy reform has been issues for decades. And yet you have President Trump saying, hey, I'm going to solve it in the next 4 years. Okay. So anyways, there were problematic speakers. You have Ambrose, Marjorie Green spoke, problematic, as someone who's here in Georgia. Mike Pompeo, who blamed President Biden for the Afghanistan withdrawal, even though he was the one that negotiated the deal during his time as a Secretary of State under Trump, and problematic. And even when they brought in some of the soldiers, again, who are we, quote unquote, blaming for this? And should there even be a blame? I mean, when you even look at Afghanistan, it's not just about America's decision to go in. It's also about why, strategy, blah, blah. I mean, that's going to encompass multiple administrations, and you can't put that all on one person. Then Hulk Hogan. I mean, not only has there been reports of him using the N-word, saying he, definitely doesn't want his daughter dating anyone Black, and even was dismissed from, I think, was it the WWE or whatever he was doing, because of some of the controversial things that he was doing. He gets up there and rips his shirt, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, this is supposed to be a conservative want to use the word, maybe professional type thing. I mean, we're talking about people who represent us in government and legislation, and yet you're ripping your shirt, which has an American flag on it. Okay. But anyways, of course, the most problematic person of the night was Donald Trump. And a lot of media, and since Mark is in, Dr. Williams is here, I'm going to say, including Van Jones, since that seems to be your person, was over here talking about, oh, he's changed. He's going to go up there. He's going to unify. And I think at some point, Van Jones called the convention, Obama's 2008 convention. And I'm like, come on. Again, people, you're not blind. You do not listen. If you can see for yourself that, hey, no. That Obama 2008 was not only sold out, packed from the arena to outside. I can see that here in Milwaukee, it's not sold out, it's not packed, and you have a lot of noticeable absences. So let's not create false narratives. Let's not go back to the Donald Trump, I had more people at my inauguration than Biden. Let's not create fake news. But anyways, so as we're listening to him speak after the media has pumped up this convention, pumped up what we're going to hear, I don't doubt they read a speech that they thought, oh, maybe this is more unifying. And so since we've read the speech, we can say this. Did you forget who Donald Trump is? I mean, this is someone who likes to go and repeatedly goes off the cuff. And even watching him read, you can tell he's pained. You can tell he's like, no, this isn't me. Me reading from a script, that's not me. I've got to go off cuff. And that is exactly what he did. Went off cuff. And I'm not even knocking going off cuff, because people have often told me, hey, Sonya, you sometimes speak more eloquently, or sometimes your message gets delivered better when you're off cuff versus when you're reading from a script. So I'm not knocking going off cuff. But then when you do go off cuff, know that your true character then gets demonstrated. And that is exactly what happened. When he went off cuff, he starts saying crazy Nancy Pelosi. He starts saying the Democrats are out to get me, try to assassinate me. He starts saying that, hey, I'm going to solve the Russian crisis within my first 100 days. I mean, he just says some of the most outlandish things. I'm going to build this wall. I'm going to build this wall, in which it's not as if he was never president and had during his time as president. And he even had a majority in the Congress because he was able to pass the tax bill during his time as president. He could have built this wall, but he didn't. So then this suggestion that, oh, but it's going to happen this time. It's just like, oh my gosh, we are truly dealing with someone who repeatedly lies. And it just rolls off his tongue so well that if you aren't doing your due diligence, people, this is so important. If you aren't doing your due diligence, you will fall into the lie. And that to me is what was the overall theme that I felt from the RNC, is that, oh, this is a cult. Because again, like I said, the party's fractured. Again, you have a VP who condemned this guy and is now kissing the ring. You had problematic speakers, and you had a nominee who repeatedly lies for the sake of elevating himself. And so that to me, and this is getting to the topic within the last 5 minutes, I'm sorry, but that to me, I'm just like, okay, if we're talking about unity, let's first define it. And we've got in the dictionary that is defined as, hey, how you're joined as a whole. Everyone comes together for one common thing. And last week, when we discussed the relevancy of church, I mean, we're defining church as, well, hey, where two or more are gathered in my name. So that becomes the commonality. We're gathered for the sake of worship to God. Here, I felt like Trump is saying, hey, you unify to gather for the sake of putting me in office. Because he said, hey, I will make sure everyone votes for me. I mean, these are his words. Again, I am not advocating for any political violence. I want to make sure that's clear, but I am advocating for due diligence and facts and making sure, again, you recognize what's important to you and you vote accordingly. So that is the unifying message that I got from the Republican Party. You unify to support me. That, to me, is not the unifying message that we should get from this attempted assassination. When we are talking about America as a whole, we hopefully unify around either the Constitution or you unify around the philosophy that, hey, make sure we protect freedoms that allow us to then achieve life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Let's unify around that. And in unifying around that, it opens the door for, hey, we can have constructive debate. Because again, both of us are trying to get to the same point, and that is making sure Constitution or our Declaration of Independence or whatever is being followed. So yeah, have constructive debate. I'd say that even in the church, have constructive debate about what your church is doing in terms of what's happening in the Sunday service or what's happening in auxiliaries. Hey, be honest, because there should be a common goal of making sure the worship to God is met and God is subsequently pleased. The same here. Let's unify to make sure our laws, our protections are kept. We're not going to unify around one person. This is not a dictatorship. This is not an authoritarian regimen. This is a democracy or a republic, which means that, hey, the voice of the people is important. So we make sure whoever has their hand on needles when it turns to government, that person represents the voice of the people. And so to find out what the voice of the people are, yes, we have to have honest conversations and dialogues around that. And that is